Well, welcome. This is a truly historic day, and this is a truly, we believe, historic process that we're beginning. I would like to apologize. I see some of you waving yourselves with paper or magazines. Apologize for the temperature and the uncomfortable humidity in the room. I was told that this morning the AC was working fine. I think I'm starting to feel some air moving. And so as a result of the air conditioning stopping working, it's a little hot. So please bear with us. Hopefully the technicians or the folks who are, the repairmen are here and at work. So I'm going to basically, again, my name is Kyle Hentz. I'm a co-founder of 9/11 Citizens Watch. We're a watchdog group based in D.C. and New York. And I'm going to read a brief introductory statement. And the format is very much like a congressional hearing. We have commissioners here that I'll be introducing. We have witnesses providing testimony, whistleblowers, experts, authors, and so on. They will come forward. They'll give a 15-minute presentation, 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes with PowerPoint or video. And then the commissioners will pose questions to the witness. They will be sworn in. Some of you who maybe attended the early 9/11 Commission's hearings noticed that they weren't swearing in the witnesses. And they only started because we made some noise about it and the press raised some questions of Chairman Kaine. So let me begin my formal remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, New Yorkers, fellow Americans, and concerned citizens from around the world, welcome to the first hearings of the 9/11 Citizens Commission, who some have dubbed the omission hearings. Thank you for coming to join our commissioners in hearing the testimony of witnesses we have assembled today. We are present here today to say that we, the people, will be heard, and that neither courageous whistleblowers nor unflinching investigative journalists will be silenced or intimidated by the pomp and circumstance of a deeply compromised 9/11 commission, the one commissioned by our government, after much pressure was put on by family members and other concerned citizens. The Bush administration obstructed and did not want to launch an investigation into the attacks. And when they did, the Congress only allotted $3 million until, again, public pressure, family member pressure, raised the budget, and eventually they were granted $15 million. It was still a pittance compared to what they invested in the Challenger shuttle disaster. I think they spent $50 million. Moving on. We are here to exercise our God in the broadest, most inclusive sense, given right of assembly, of free speech, and ultimately to demand redress of grievances relative to the events of September 11th and the actions taken by the U.S. government in our names in the wake of the September 11th attacks. 3 years ago, the world was transfixed when in the course of an hour and 20 minutes, 4 aircraft were employed as weapons to murder nearly 3,000 people from scores of countries around the world. We must ask ourselves and our leaders how we can maintain that ours is a government of, by, and for a free people when a panel commissioned to investigate 9/11 and funded with just $15 million does not answer a majority of the questions posed by victim family members and others. And I can confirm for you that after speaking with one of the leaders of the victim family groups, that indeed, as they've combed through their nearly 400 questions and looked at the report, they have found thus far, and I haven't gone through all their questions, but the majority of them have not been addressed. How can we champion the great principles of our founders when nearly 400 questions were posed by the families over the course of 2 years and nowhere were they directly answered by a government-appointed panel, distinguished panel? This after fighting the administration who did not want to investigate and lobbying hard on Capitol Hill. This is an outrage, and all the enacted recommendations, or hoped to be enacted, those who hope to enact the recommendations put forward by the Commission in the world won't change the reality that the government failed to provide a full accounting of all the facts and circumstances. The Commission was charged with a dual mandate, to provide recommendations to make us safer on one hand, but to also provide us a full accounting of the facts and circumstances. We're here to raise questions and doubt about their accounting of the events and the facts and circumstances surrounding the attacks. These are facts and circumstances that Bob McIlvaine, one of our commissioners, wants to have answers to, wants to be further scrutinized. For their wives, husbands, brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers, the victim family members, they perished on 9/11. New York's finest and bravest and our fellow citizens, many of whom still to this day have not been granted proper burial. We are here to right this wrong, this travesty of justice, and begin to redress the bodies of evidence too long ignored that will help us to begin to answer the questions and help place pressure on the government, the important places in government, to reopen the investigation, to answer the questions and the issues that the 9/11 Commission has either ignored or failed to address completely. It is vitally important to note that not only hasn't the alleged primary culprit not been brought to justice, but neither has a single co-conspirator been successfully prosecuted in nearly 3 years since 9/11. Not one single co-conspirator has been successfully brought to justice through our court system and charged with complicity in 9/11. And yet, in the wake of the attacks, not a single government official in a position of responsibility at the time of 9/11 has been held accountable in any way. In fact, what you have instead is people in positions of responsibility getting promotions and rewards in the wake of the attacks. We have an intense and full program of hearings planned today. In 6 hours, we cannot possibly begin to address everything that has been brought forward by different researchers, investigative journalists, and family members. But we can begin to touch upon that which has not been addressed by the Kane Commission. We can begin to frame the key questions and the body of evidence that suggests perhaps a wider circle of complicity. The Zogby poll, commissioned by 9/11 Citizens Watch and 9/11truth.org, found that nearly 50%, nearly half of New Yorkers polled, believe that the administration or some leaders with this particular wording had specific knowledge of an attack imminent on or around September 11th and consciously failed, these were the words in the question, to take action. 66% of those polled in New York City believe that the investigation should be reopened by Congress or by the Attorney General of New York State, Eliot Spitzer. There are many events upcoming on 9/11 this coming Saturday here in New York City in the Hammerstein Ballroom, the Manhattan Center, from 8 to 10:30. They'll be examining some of the questions we won't be. There are events in Santa Barbara, Washington, D.C., sponsored by Pacifica, in San Francisco, sponsored by 911truth.org, and in other cities across the country and around the world. We're scheduled to go to 7 p.m. We hope to have time for your questions. We'll be passing around 4x6 cards later. And this evening, as Michael mentioned, we have 911truth.org. It's an umbrella organization that is trying to bring forward to the broader audience the key questions and to direct the public to bodies of evidence, documentaries, books, etc., that begin to open up a broader discussion about what happened on September 11th. They, with 9/11 Truth, New York 911truth.org, are sponsoring the world premiere of a documentary by Barry Zwicker, who is here as a witness and who will also be answering questions during Q&A session tonight. There are 2 showings, 8 p.m. and 9:30. We have a 20-minute break around 3 p.m. And what I'd like to do now, before I introduce our commissioners briefly for their opening statements, I'd like to ask that we observe a moment of silence, and that for those who perished on 9/11 and in the wars and violence since. So let us proceed with a moment of silence and prayer, if you wish, before we begin our first hearing. And I'd like to begin with these words: "Not by power, not by money, but by thy Spirit." Thank you. A couple of changes to our panel. Dr. Bob Bowman had his house damaged by the hurricane. He was to be one of our commissioners. And Catherine Austin Fitts, a former official with the first Bush administration, was to join Cynthia McKinney to co-chair today's hearings. And we hope to have her back should we do follow-on hearings from this event. She's an extraordinary resource and can help shed light on the economic systems underlying much of the malaise that we see in our world today. So let me move on and introduce the commissioners that we do have here. We have Dr. Faz Khan at the far end of the table. He's an American Muslim of Indian and Afghani descent or extraction. He is a doctor, an MD, emergency physician, and internist here in New York City. On 9/11, he was on duty and treated victims at a triage center and worked with rescue teams. He's active in the peace movement. He's a lecturer and writer on various issues related to Islam. He is an assistant imam at various New York and Long Island mosques and was a delegate on the Baghdad Peace Belt pilgrimage that went to Baghdad the week before the war began. And then Bob McIlvaine, very briefly, and he can say a little bit more if you'd like. But Bob, we're honored to have Bob here on the panel. As some of you, most of you are probably aware, there was not a family member on the 9/11 Commission. At one point it was discussed, but in the end it was made up primarily of conflicted insiders from inside the Beltway. So Bob McIlvaine lost his son Bobby, who was working and presenting on a business day in North Tower. And then we have our chair, today's chair, future co-chair of today's hearing, Cynthia McKinney. And much of you, I'm sure most of you, are familiar with her extraordinary record in Congress, standing up in the voice of the people. Someone who, five-term congresswoman, who recently won her primary and is working to regain her seat. Yes, to regain her seat in Congress. So let me turn it over to Cynthia and the commissioners. And then after they've made brief introductory remarks, we're going to show a portion of, an edited portion of testimony provided by Mindy Kleinberg of the 9/11 Family Steering Committee that she made before the 9/11 Commission on the first day of hearings, March 31st of last year, down at the Customs House in Manhattan. So let me turn it over to Cynthia. Cynthia, please.
Thank you, Kyle. I would like to take this opportunity to thank 911 Truth and Citizens Watch for having this important hearing today. I'd like to also take the time to thank Commissioner Khan as well as Commissioner McIlvaine for agreeing to serve with me on this very important commission. I would also like to mention another commissioner who couldn't be with us today, but whose commitment we all know, and that is Catherine Austin Fitts. Today is just the beginning. Your support can ensure that we follow up with more of these hearings to flesh out all the remaining questions that experts and family members know have not been fully addressed by the official 911 Commission or the Bush administration. Of course, please forgive me, but I cannot be in the city of New York and not say thank you, New York City. But this time, not just for supporting me, but for also not being bamboozled into submission by questionable insider backroom characters who want to take away our freedoms, send our children off to war, and rip to shreds the social safety net for the American people. And of course, I can't say thank you to New York City without also saying thank you to Georgia's 4th Congressional District Democratic voters and our supporters of truth all over our country who put me in a position to return to Congress as Congress's sojourner for truth. A special thanks to the small coterie of friends who kept my questions relevant by their own deep understanding of the fundamental danger posed by today's forces, known and unknown, operating in our name at this time. Those thanks especially include the dedicated leaders of the 9/11 Truth Movement, whose work has spawned similar gatherings this week all over our country. For me personally, it means the thousands of people I've had the opportunity to meet who are not just against everything, but who are in the deepest sense pro-America. Activists like our host today, Kyle Hintz, John Judge, Nicholas Levis, Michael Caine, the panelists, Ms. Singh, Mr. Rupert, Mr. Springman, Mr. Thompson, as well as my fellow commissioners. And finally, a word of thanks to the $20 million man whose movie came out literally just days before my election. In the face of stinging criticism about the impact that his film might have had on my election, Michael Moore responded, and I quote, "I'm glad Cynthia McKinney is coming back to Congress, and I'm glad if my movie helped make that happen." Even all those thank yous don't do justice to you, the activist community. But enough with that, because now we've got work to do. Finally, I'm serving on a commission where it's all right to ask questions. We have allotted time at the conclusion of the panelist presentations for audience questions. Now, I know that I intend to ask a whole bunch of questions, and I hope you do too, because we've got the experts here who have studied this tragedy and know its details backward and forward. Hurricane Francis stormed into Florida and to a lesser extent my state of Georgia and left the cleanup to us. Well, the Republican Party stormed into New York City, their words dripping with the politicization of an American tragedy, and they've left the cleanup to us. Now, I don't mind being part of the cleanup crew, but here we operate under a different set of rules. First, our minds in this place are open. Facts are welcome in this place. We have no political agenda other than the truth. My birth city of Atlanta has as its symbol Resurgence the Phoenix, because out of General Sherman's Civil War ashes, that jewel of the South rose again and even sent a plain-spoken man like Jimmy Carter to the White House. We take no credit for zeal. When Reconstruction was truly over and all the civil rights gains from the Civil War had been wiped out through Jim Crow legislation in the South, Representative George White, the last black man serving in the United States Congress on his way out, because those Jim Crow laws had made it to North Carolina too, rose on the floor of the House in 1901 and said, "This, Mr. Chairman, is perhaps the Negro's temporary farewell to the American Congress. But let me say, Phoenix-like, he will rise up someday and come again." And with that, the United States Congress was all white for one generation. On one of my previous trips to New York City, I was given a beautiful poster entitled, "Truth crushed to the ground will rise again." Today and into tonight, we will explore the truth of 9/11. The truth about America's tragedy belongs to all of us and can only be crushed to the ground for so long. The work of this commission, our expert panelists, and our audience will ensure that the truth of 9/11 will rise one day. I look forward to the intense learning about to take place during these presentations of our esteemed panelists. And now we will hear from our Commissioner, Mr. McIlvaine, Commissioner McIlvaine, and Commissioner Khan.
My name's Bob McIlvain. I'm from Orland, Pennsylvania. I lost my son. When I did this to the press, I wasn't able to get through it, but maybe the second time around. I lost my son at Merrill Lynch. Can't do it. And it's not just because it's 9/11 now. It's just, remember when I speak, it happens. But it brings the cold reality to the whole thing. There's a lot of people dying in the world. And we're talking horrible deaths. The deaths of those people down there were horrible. To this day, I just had a discussion with, I'm sorry, I forget your name, but I'm still trying to find out what happened to him. I want to know to that last second what happened to him. Every parent wants to know that. I've run into a lot of parents in my neighborhood have lost children. And you just want to know that last second what horror that your child was going through. And I think about it every day. And it rips me apart. And to do this, it truly is a double-edged sword because I really would, many days, I want to go to an island and just sit there the rest of my life, ignore the rest of the world. And as my son said yesterday, he said, why don't you be happy? Try to be happy. Well, it's impossible to be happy. I have happy moments. The suffering isn't as bad. But the pain is still very immense. It's always there. And when you do something like that, it brings you right back to day one. Day one I have every day of my life. I've made that choice. It's been a wonderful journey. And I do it for my son because he really believed that knowledge is power. And if anything you get out of this, it's knowledge. And you have to take it out to the people, out to the American public. That's the only way we can do this. The people of this country must realize what the truth is. And history is replete with so many lies, and they continue day in, day out. And it's just not this Bush administration, it's every administration. And trust me, I'm not an authority up here. All these other people are great authorities. This is a learning process for me. I've made every commission meeting. I've been involved with the widows. I mean, they've done tremendous work. What they've done, the fact that this is out in the public, it would have been an impossibility. Just don't forget, George Bush never wanted this commission. We would have had Kissinger as the head of the commission if it wasn't for the widows. They went to him and said to him, didn't you have some dealings with the bin Ladens in your past? And with that, he quit the commission. Yet we would have had him. So it's just so important that you take a lot out of this and take it out there onto the streets. Because I just deal with the people, dealing with my relatives, dealing with my people in my neighborhood. They still look at it and say, well, I still want to be safe. No one wants to lose their life. And they look at the president and say, well, he's our protector. Our military is our protector. Well, but the thing is, this is the way it is. If you're raising a family and you have 3 kids, all you want to know is you're protected. And I'm not saying that this is right. I'm just saying it's so difficult to get to people to explain to them, where do I start? Do I start in Iran in 53 or do I go into the Congo in 60?
Right, exactly.
It's a constant thing, but it's an education. And I don't know, I think there's a lot of people, it's a lost cause in this country. That's why we have to get out to the students of the world. And they have to understand where this all comes from. It's connecting the dots. My son didn't die just because George Bush wasn't inattentive. It has a lot to do with Clinton. It has a lot to do with Bush. It goes all the way back to Eisenhower.
Yes.
Okay, so I just... And this is the legacy of my son. If I would have died in those towers, he'd be doing the same thing. He wants to know the truth. I want to know the truth. And I have found myself in a position, I get invited to this just because I'm a parent. It brings a lot of power to it. And I've had the opportunity to speak around the world. Although I won't fly, I do a lot of TV and radio, but I haven't flown yet. But it's been a great experience for me because I'm an educator. I was a teacher most of my life. And to me, it's all education. And that's what it has to be. We just constantly have to educate. And then maybe people will start participating. And that, to me, is the solution. Okay, thank you very much. I'll move over there.
Oh, okay.
afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It's a privilege and an honor for me again to share the platform with Cynthia McKinney, and it's been an honor for me to be asked to be a commissioner on this panel. The importance of 9/11 truth cannot be overemphasized. It is impossible to overemphasize the issue of 9/11 truth. Now, the attacks themselves and the false explanations both have been a springboard not only to further criminal agendas by those who wield military and political influence in their bid to maintain a one-way flow of cash and natural resources and labor. And notice I don't make any mention of nation states when it comes to these deep political issues, because a lot of the deep politics transcends the dialectic of nation states. We have to think beyond nation states sometimes. Our foreign policy, to some extent, may be executed through Washington, but it often does not originate there. It's very important for people to understand that when they probe these issues. Now, the false explanations that have been put forth by the mainstream media has, in a very powerful way, intellectually arrested many of not only the American public opinion, but also many peace activist opinion. Their opinions have been arrested. And using 9/11 as a platform for peace activism while not addressing 9/11 truth is just purely on the realm of logic, completely absurd. The whole Muslims gone bad plus overwhelmed or incompetent intelligence equals 9/11, that just doesn't cut it anymore for anyone with the slightest amount of mental capacity to read the facts as you're going to have them presented to you today. But it's not just presenting the facts. It's not even digesting the facts. As the evidence grows, we need to be psychologically strong enough to face the implications like Bob just mentioned about how deep this can go. As the evidence grows, we have to be completely dissatisfied, and forgive me for using medical lingo, I can't help it, but with incomplete diagnoses, with partial truths, or with just treating or addressing symptoms without trying to root out root causes. Now, any activist working for peace, anyone who claims to be a truth seeker, has to be honest. If you're not going to be honest, then you might as well just get out of the game. At some point, everyone has to ask themselves, well, am I more committed to my role as a spokesperson, or am I more in love with my soapbox than I am with seeking truth? Am I more satisfied with occupying a niche in the activist scene than I am with seeking the truth? And as a physician, I often ask myself, am I just satisfied treating symptoms and not trying to get at the cure? I just want to draw an analogy for you to really just bring the point home. Say you were a patient of mine and you came to me with a cough, some malaise, not feeling well. I'd advise some rest, maybe some steam inhalation, maybe take a chest x-ray. On the chest x-ray, I might happen to see a little nodule in your lung. But continue to hack away, come back days later, I hear some wheezing. Maybe it's allergy season. I'll give you a little inhaler. How many asthmatics are there out there? Use their inhalers and some anti-allergy medicine. Days later, you come back, you're still hacking, you're still coughing. Except this time you're bringing a phlegm. Well, then I'll give you a very strong cough suppressant, something that numbs the entire upper airway so you don't really feel the need to cough. Then after a while, you're better, and you come back again, coughing, bringing up more phlegm, this time with fevers and chills. Aha, pneumonia. I'll diagnose. It's pneumonia. Give you some antibiotics, give you some fluids, and you're better for a while, and then again you come back. This time you're losing weight, you're dehydrated. The fevers continue. Well, no problem, I'll hospitalize you. Give you some IV fluids, I can correct the dehydration. Give you some nutrition. We can even give nutrition through the IV if you're not hungry. A week later, your cough becomes bloody. First a little bit of blood-tinged mucus, then gobs and gobs of blood. Well, that's okay. I'll transfuse you. I'll just give you blood back through your IV. No problem. Then the nausea, the vomiting, the blurry vision. You can't walk right. The lymph nodes in your neck are golf ball sized. What's all of this at this point, you're asking? Well, it's what's called a paraneoplastic syndrome from cancer that spreads. Now, how absurd it is to just treat symptoms and not diagnose root causes. How absurd it is to treat symptoms of cancer but not even mention the word cancer. Many activists don't even want to go near the 9/11 truth issue. It's completely diagnostically dishonest not to approach this issue. Making partial diagnoses, treating symptoms in the face of obvious signs that there's something much deeper is harmful. It's harmful, and it allows the perpetrative agenda to be unnoticed. So I hope you open your ears and pay attention. I'm going to learn a lot today. I've been following this issue. I've been very supportive of 9/11 Truth, and I hope we have a great session. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners, for your opening statements.